will start, which will actually pitch the idea of a new Bharat, a Bharat that is ready to take on the world, and that is what we are going to see over the next 2 days. You can see in the visuals over here that each and every person, either from the medical staff or from essential services, their passes are being checked, their ID cards are being checked, their passes for the vehicles are being checked, and post that they are being allowed to go inside, they are being allowed to go anywhere inside the NDMC area, and this is the kind of security.
Welcome everyone. Thanks a lot for staying with us. You're watching Plain Speak with me, Shivani Gupta. It's day one of the G20 Leaders Summit in New Delhi. And the biggest news is that the Delhi Declaration, which was seeming virtually impossible, has now been adopted. This is a massive win for India, coming after tough negotiations and despite the wide divergence between the G7 group and Russia and China. India has been seeking a focus on developmental issues at the G20 instead of geopolitical issues, and the fact that it has managed to speak of the war in Ukraine and still get all to agree on the language and the message is a big victory, not a feat that many thought would be possible during this Delhi summit. According to External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, a considerable amount was spent on the Russia-Ukraine war, and everybody helped to reach the final statement and agreeable position. India has even played a role in resolving the impasse at last year's G20 Summit in Bali, where Prime Minister Narendra Modi's "This is not an era of war" message helped stitch together a declaration. This was not the only high point though. Earlier today, the African Union formally took a seat as a new member of the G20 at the Prime Minister Modi's invitation. The G20 is thus officially G21 now. Over the past few years, India has actively established itself as a prominent advocate of the global south and highlighted their issues, difficulties and aspirations, particularly those of the African continent. And the addition of the African Union marks another win and also the legacy of Bharat's presidency. Let me first break down the focus of the Delhi Declaration that has been adopted today. So there is, of course, a very strong focus on sustainable, balanced and inclusive growth, which is, of course, the big issue that the world is in any case facing and has been one of the pet projects of the Prime Minister. The accelerating the progress of the Sustainable Development Goals is another big focus. There is Green Development Pact for a sustainable future. Remember, all of these are interconnected, but really the fundamental things that the biggest nations in the world need to take care of. Multilateral institutions for the 21st century. This is an era where we are talking about multilateralism as a concept itself being in danger, and therefore to continue to reinvigorate multilateralism is a major thrust of this declaration. Now, just like the conduct of the G20 summit through the year, the outcomes of the India presidency are also huge. Just sharing with you a couple of the numbers that make this not just a successful but a highly successful presidency under India. So with India as chair, the G20 has managed as many as 73 outcomes. There are also as many as 39 annexed documents. 112 presidency documents have also been signed. And why are these numbers important? Because this is anywhere between 2 to 5 times more outcomes than the rest in the past. Now, here is also what the Delhi Declaration says on the Ukraine war, which is the biggest sticking point. So, the Ukraine war is the biggest sticking point for more than one reason. Of course, this has firmly divided the world into two blocks, the West and Russia and China on one side. This has also, of course, led to a lot of problems in the rest of the world. Even countries that are not connected to the war have faced. And therefore, any kind of declaration on the Ukraine war is extremely important, and the fact that everybody has agreed on it is key. So what does this say, the declaration? It says refrain from use of force for territorial acquisition, a message that is pretty clear. Respect territorial integrity and sovereignty of states. Use or threat of use of nuclear weapons is inadmissible. That's a big message going on. Human suffering and negative impact on food and energy security has been highlighted. The policy environment of the developing world becoming complicated has been highlighted. Negative impact on recovery process after COVID pandemic is one of the issues that has cropped up. As I said, the Ukraine war has had a far-reaching impact, not just on the countries involved or NATO countries involved, but the rest of the world too. It also talks about how resolution of conflicts via dialogue and diplomacy is critical. It also talks about how the world should be united in our endeavor to address the adverse impact of war and support a comprehensive, just and durable peace in Ukraine. It also interestingly mentions the Prime Minister's line that this is not an era for war towards the end. So no prizes for guessing. The big issue that we're debating today, of course, is the massive win for Bharat. With the Delhi Declaration adopted, with a very successful conduct of the G20 Leaders Summit in the national capital, and many more outcomes that have come through and will come till tomorrow as well, this is turning out to be a successful presidency for Bharat.
एक खुशखबरी मिली है हमारी टीम्स के हार्डवर्क से और आप सभी के सहयोग से नई दिल्ली G20 लीडर्स समिट डिक्लेरेशन पर सहमति बनी है।
All G20 member states have come to New Delhi with a strong sense of responsibility about addressing the most pressing global challenges. Speaking for India, we are clear that no one left behind.
Under the guidance of Honorable Prime Minister, India's G20 presidency has worked for the theme One Earth, One Family, One Future.
We're also getting live visuals coming in. Remember, this is the beautiful Mandapam that has been created for the G20 Summit and the delegates. These are visuals coming in of both the President of India and the Prime Minister of India. I should say Bharat, of course, on a day like today. Making their way to the Mandapam. These are the fresh visuals that have arrived. They're going to receive the delegates, and this is where the delegates' dinner is going to take place. Of course, all of the delegates that are part of the G20 Summit from around 20 plus nations, and of course the African Union are going to be present. There are going to be some other dignitaries. For example, all chief ministers in the country have also been invited for this dinner, and we'll continue to get you the latest from the national capital. Let me also go across to some of our guests joining us. Professor Brahmachaleni, Strategic Affairs expert. Amy Tarkanian is former Nevada State GOP chairwoman and Republican strategist. Tara Karta, Distinguished Fellow, IPCS, will be with us in just a minute. And Professor Pumendra Jain, the University of Adelaide Visiting Senior Research Fellow, ISAS, is also joining us from Adelaide. Professor Lab, why don't I begin with you? Your sense of the declaration that has been adopted and announced today, and just why this is crucial for the world.
Are you asking me or Professor Jain?
Professor Jain. Mr. Chaleni, I'll come to you in just a bit. Yes, Professor
Thank
Jain.
you very much. Yes, I have just read the joint statement, which is a big breakthrough because there were concerns where there will be a joint statement at all. So it has come out, so this is a big achievement. And they have used a language which is quite interesting in terms of that, any forceful conflict or war is unacceptable. Sovereignty will be respected. So these are the words which, in Indonesia last year at the G20 Summit they were trying to reach. But in Indonesia, they said most member states agreed. In other words, some did not agree. But this is not the case, this statement, as I understand. So I think this is a big development and something which lots of commentators were thinking quite negatively about this. So India has done a bit of its diplomacy there with the help of countries like Brazil, South Africa, and Indonesia. We should remember that Indonesia was chair last year, and then it will pass to Brazil and then to South Africa. So I guess, here also we see the global South, how the global South prevailing over the Western nations, developed nations. So they're putting their agenda ahead and they're taking their, interests and their views very clearly. And most Western nations would agree to this particular position that we don't need to go straight and criticize Russia on this issue. So they are using kind of indirect language
Yeah.
and avoiding to countries like China as well.
No, but the fact that that has happened, the fact that that has happened in the New Delhi Leaders of States Summit, the fact that the West seems to have now agreed that they don't need to talk about the war in a certain manner and a common language has been found. Professor Brahmachaleni, that's a big shift in the stand that the West has been taking. Do you sense a climb down from them, realizing that something needs to be done about this situation, and the stands that all sides had taken, certainly at a forum like the G20, just cannot continue anymore?
You're absolutely right, Shivani. There is a clear softening in the Western stance. After all, the war isn't going as the United States expected, because the
Yes.
US has been supplying Ukraine with lots of weapons. In fact, the US is running low on critical munitions because it's been supplying Ukraine with such quantities of weapons and munitions that its own stocks are depleted now. And yet, the fact is that Ukraine's counteroffensive against Russian forces hasn't gone very far. In fact, it's actually failing. And then many in the US are beginning to admit that. So given the new realities on the battlefield, there is a clear softening in the Western stance, which resulted in avoiding casting blame.
Yes.
For example, in Bali, the statement deplored in the strongest terms the aggression by the Russian Federation against Ukraine and demanded the complete and unconditional withdrawal from the territory of Ukraine. This language is missing from the New Delhi Declaration. Instead, the New Delhi Declaration has general principles of international law,
Yes.
such as avoiding threat or use of force, for example. It was by emphasizing general principles that the sticking point could be overcome and a forward-looking consensus document could be adopted by consensus. And I think, this is very important because this is the last G20 summit. The next summit will be a G21 summit with Brazil hosting it. And India can certainly claim credit for the leadership role it played in helping bridge the global divides on several issues. Ukraine was just one of the issues, but there were other issues.
No, but before I move to other issues, Professor Brahmachaleni, I do want you to expand on what could have convinced the West to come down from some of their views on the Russia-Ukraine conflict and agreeing on this language which is not condemning Russia. Is it just the realization that, okay, we need a different tactic as far as dealing with Russia is concerned, and maybe in the future bring it on the table, something that sides have been resisting so far? Or is it also that India has been able to impress upon them to some degree that something is better than nothing?
Well, Shivani, two factors have been at play. One, that the West certainly wants India to play a global leadership role. The West wanted the New Delhi summit to be a success, and therefore they had an interest in the summit adopting a consensus document. So they did want India to have a successful summit. But more importantly, there is a Ukraine fatigue in the West that is becoming apparent. For example, President Joe Biden has shut the door to diplomacy with Russia, while he's sending a stream of senior officials to Beijing to stabilize US-China relations. But the New Delhi Declaration talks about dialogue and diplomacy being important to resolve any conflict. And the West is party to this document. In other words, there's a clear softening in the Western stance. the West is now looking for ways to reach out to Moscow and begin quiet negotiations. India is well placed to broker such negotiations. And I think the G20 puts India in a strong position to play the role of a bridge builder.
And possibly work towards speaking and talking to Russia, not the stance that has been adopted till now. And could a deal of sorts be in the works, given that all countries have now come together at least to agree on the language of a joint statement at the G20?
You're asking whom, Shivani?
This is for Amy, sir. Amy, could you hear me?
No, I actually couldn't hear you until just the very end of your last sentence. I apologize.
So briefly, I'm just repeating my question. What I'm trying to understand from you, do you concur with Professor Brahmachaleni that a Ukraine fatigue is setting in, that there is a re-questioning of the strategy even amongst Americans, and that the fact that the leaders could all agree to a joint language and a joint statement could be a precursor to talking to Russia?
A few things. I think, yes, he's correct on the fact that there is Ukraine fatigue. And you have to remember that President Biden is now going to be campaigning for his reelection. And so when you have half of the country wanting to stop the funding of the war, or they're still questioning the amount of money that's going towards this war, he needs crossover votes. And I know that sounds very crass, but it is true. And so he's going to have to think very hard about appealing to those who maybe question, the lack of transparency of the amount of money that's been going over into this war. Secondly, I agree with the fact that the U.S. wants this G20 summit to be a successful one for the Prime Minister. And I think it's been very apparent that with President Biden and the meeting with the Prime Minister, visiting the White House over the summer, along with the prior summit and their get-together, even the ones that are behind closed doors, it's being reported that their meetings have been very successful in wanting to work well with one another. So I think that's very promising. And whether if the verbiage of this joint statement is as strong as we had hoped or weaker than anticipated, I think still at the end of the day, they are just trying to make sure that things are as positive as possible, still knowing that we may have some slight difference of opinions.
Right. Interesting. Dr. Tara Karta is also joining us. Ma'am, thanks a lot and great to have you on the show yet again. Our guests seem to be talking about how the West is very firmly invested in making sure that the Delhi summit was successful. That in itself is a huge statement. Why do you think that is? Why do you think the West kept aside its very grave differences with Russia and China today to make sure that a Delhi declaration can be achieved and announced?
No, I think you're right that the language of the declaration is unexpectedly mild. I mean, it is, if you compare this to the last UN resolution, which was pretty strong. I mean, that was in February 2023. There's a huge difference, right? But there's also one factor you should take into account is that the number of abstentions at the UN have been steadily going up. There is a global, I don't know if there is a, if there is if people in US are tired of the war or not, I can't say. But globally, everybody is saying, please end this war because it's causing so much of economic trouble for everybody else. And there have been sustained efforts by everyone to end this, including Brazil, including Saudi Arabia, including, of course, India, and has played a very quiet role in the Black Grain Initiative itself. So that has been going on along. Plus, yes, there is definitely, I think President Biden said that he would be with India at this summit. I mean, that was such an amazing statement. He said that. So there is obviously some what shall I say, interests coming together here, a lot of people coming together, and perhaps we can see what is going to be seen down the line. You have the initiative on the, the new thing, Saudi Arabia, from India, Saudi Arabia, Europe. That is a huge thing.
Absolutely. I was going to just talk about that. And let me go across to Professor Jain one more time. Not only has the declaration been adopted, there's, of course, a Biofuel Alliance. There's the African Union's entry officially, which was backed heavily by India. But this, this rail connectivity or rail ports connectivity project, bringing together Europe, EU, and Saudi Arabia, UAE, India is just as big as it gets. And the geopolitical implications of it are again huge.
Yes, absolutely, you're right. Infrastructure has been a big issue on the agenda of the G20. And we should not forget that China has got a big infrastructure plan through the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. And countries like Japan in the past invested very heavily on infrastructure programs around the Indo-Pacific. Now the G20 has taken up that agenda in a big way because they understand that it is very important that infrastructure development takes place. And in this, they see the role of India in a big way. And it is no surprise that the Americans and other G20 members, Western countries, they have proposed infrastructure as a major item on the agenda. But the challenge is how to operationalize it. Who is going to fund? Who is going to see the project going through? It's all right, it's good to declare something, but it's another thing to implement. And my question and my concern is that how they are going to implement. We have seen before infrastructure initiatives between US and Australia and Japan and so on and so forth. But very little progress has been made.
Okay,
so
fair enough. That's a fair question to raise. Professor Brahmachaleni, do we have to be a little pragmatic about some of these agreements and look at the concerns posed by their slow implementation or slow progress as well, and not just get excited about the fact that they have announced it?
Well, not just we have to be pragmatic, we have to be cautious. Because if you look at the history of the G20, its summits have produced pious commitments by member states. Every joint statement coming out from a G20 summit embodies pious commitments that are largely ignored by its member states. So the document by itself that has emerged in New Delhi looks quite impressive. But one has to look at the track record of the G20, the fact that the G20 is at a crossroads, its relevance, its usefulness is being questioned by critics. The G20 needs to make itself more relevant to today's global challenges, which means that whatever agreements have been reached in New Delhi should be implemented.
No, sir, I think you didn't get the issue we were discussing. We were actually talking about the agreement of the infrastructure, the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment and India, Middle East, Europe Economics Corridor that was agreed upon today, something that has been discussed behind closed doors for quite some time. Does this also fall under the same ambit of skepticism?
Yes, it does. I was going to come to that.
Yeah.
The real utility of the G20 summit, whether it's held in New Delhi or was held in Bali or elsewhere earlier, is in the fact that it provides a venue for bilateral, trilateral, and even quadrilateral discussions on the margins. And in New Delhi, we had some of the most productive discussions and even deals emerging on the margins. This supposed shipping and rail corridor that is going to stretch from India to Europe to the Middle East is one such proposal. It's only a proposal. What this proposal seeks is to study. It says it'll explore the possibilities of such a corridor. There's no agreement. There's only a memorandum of understanding.
Right.
There's a long way to go. The commercial feasibility of this corridor has to be studied. Who's going to put the money? The Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE are flush with funds, given the fact that there's a surging energy windfall that they're reaping. So certainly, Saudis and the Emiratis are eager to invest money in projects that will enhance their geopolitical and economic leverage.
Right.
And certainly, this corridor might be appealing to them. But this corridor has not been examined commercially. And I think we need to be a little cautious that this isn't a project that is going to take off immediately. This is a project that will be examined very carefully, and its commercial feasibility will be studied over many months.
Okay, fair enough. Dr. Tarakarta, you want to weigh in on this as well? This is, of course, of strategic and geopolitical importance to India. Of course, the relevance is being seen in context of China's Belt and Road project. But could it remain just an announcement, or do you feel confident that the countries, because they have signed a memorandum, have shown the belief after many, many months of deliberations that yes, they need to do this? And if they were to do this, what would the implications, according to you, be?
See, I would agree with Brahma and Professor Chalini that it's a long road. But then the thing is, your Prime Minister has been prioritizing the Sagarmala project, right? That is also tied to that. And I think from what I heard is that he is quite upset that it hasn't been progressing as well as it should. So this is going to be a priority, Sagarmala. That's a given. Plus, you have existing trade routes with Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's not as if it's something which is new, right? It is there. You are merely now trying to connect this whole thing into a route which could or could not make out. But look, the point is, as far as we are concerned, all our issues have been tick-boxed. In fact, sometimes I feel a little sorry for Brazil, because this is going to be a hard act to follow. You've tick-boxed the Africa, the day one, first day, first show kind of thing. You had the African inclusion. Second day, you had this announcement of this corridor. Third day is the declaration again, which has happened, which is against all public expectations. So and if you go through the text, I'm still going through it, there's some pretty encouraging stuff there.
Okay.
It's encouraging, but again, like Professor Chalini said, it should be implemented, especially in terms of climate finance. One thing is, which most of us forget, is that even the US, I think 20 billion they lost this year on climate disasters alone. So something we have to get together on this. Things are getting pretty bad.
Okay. Yes. Amy, I have a final minute left. I do want to take the American perspective of just India's role overall, the G20 presidency over the last 1 year or so, and also the successful conduct, if I may say so, although there are days to go, of the G20 Leaders Summit in the national capital. India has really pulled no stops as far as the hosting of the summit is concerned. It has taken enormous steps in making the visit comfortable and even awesome for all of the delegates, and really present an India which is a continuous living civilizational and its ethos. Your sense of how the world, especially Americans, may be viewing this?
Sure. Well, I think everything is positive that's been taking place with the Prime Minister and President Biden. And I think the fact that the conversations are wide open and that they are taking place is a good thing. So if the meeting of these leaders and their ideas come to fruition, or if it's going to take years in the making to get some of these areas accomplished, I think the fact that they're even having this discussion is important. And I think it's very promising. And if we are able to continue and have the strength with the relationship that we have right now, I think that's going to be vital, especially, once again, I'm going to mention, with our upcoming election for a president. I think that's going to be something that the world is probably going to be watching to see who is elected as our next president, to see if this can continue in the positive way that it's been going so far.
All right. I have to leave it at that. I do thank all of our guests for joining us for this conversation. Of course, this is going to be a far-reaching consequence of the G20 presidency of India. Two things, of course. One, the Delhi Declaration finally coming in and a consensus being brought about under India's presidency for the Russia-Ukraine war. mention language, and of course, we will talk a little bit more about this in just a bit, the African Union entry, the legacy that India will leave on the G20. And as one of our guests pointed out, this is the last of the G20 because from next year onwards, it will officially be the G21. Let's also play out a conversation with Union Minister Hardeep Puri on more that has been achieved in this summit.
Is that what we're planning to do? Change the name of India to Bharat?
India, that is Bharat. I mean, it's there in the constitution. It's been there all around. Why is this a talking point now?
You're saying it's a big day for India, but there were some tough negotiations which had to take place. There were many people who were apprehensive that perhaps there won't even be a New Delhi declaration. The word Russia is missing. You talk about Ukraine. Was that a compromise?
No. First of all, any serious document which is a subject of negotiation always goes down to the wire. It always goes down to the wire. Words have meanings, etc. I am delighted that you've had a unanimous adoption of this declaration. This declaration is about human-centered development, post-COVID, the new world order. This is about the G20, in a sense, providing an impetus to other multilateral and plurilateral setups, with many of the international organizations, in the words of the UN Secretary General himself, not being regarded as being fit for purpose. Here is a G20 which has delivered. So let's celebrate that.
Okay. Now let's talk about the Biofuel Global Alliance. 19 countries have agreed to it, but there were reservations from countries like Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, who depend on fossil fuel for their economy. Do you think this kind of an alliance is really feasible and it will work in the long run?
Oh, I have no doubt. I have no doubt. Let's be very clear about it. The Biofuels Alliance has been negotiated over an extended period of time. 85% of the world's biofuel production is represented in here. If 15% are having doubts, and who says that the fossil fuel producing countries are against it? One of those countries, UAE, has signed on to it. And in fact, there are producing countries, consuming countries. Singapore is there. There are other people there. Bangladesh has signed on. So many. So I mean, 19 countries, Pallavi, and 12 international organizations to be the initial ones to join on is a big step. And so this is an idea whose time has come, and in the coming time, you will see more of biofuel focus, which involves defining what a biofuel is. What will be the standards? What will be the technical certification? Who will do the collaboration? And we are planning to do this in a cost-effective way, right from the beginning in virtual mode. Get all the stakeholders together. This is not just an intergovernmental alliance. That's why you will see a lot of the Biofuels Alliance in the times to come.
Is this also a way for India to be a champion on this in this particular field?
Madam,
your own way to be a superpower?
No, it's a superpower. I don't know where you get it. When I studied international relations by chance, 39 years in the Foreign Service, I got a chance to study a little bit. There's no such thing as a superpower. India has economic imperatives. Today, we are making a success of biofuels. Today, we are able to cut down our import bill. We are able to accelerate our transition to green fuels, thanks to biofuel. There will come a time when this 20% stipulation also will not hold good anymore. Because today we did 20% because we were told that 20% is the mixing limit, which, if you follow, you don't need to change any parts in a car. Today, I think the producers who sell, the manufacturers who sell, German and Japanese who sell flexi-fuel cars in Brazil are looking at sending those flexi-fuel cars to India. Along with the Gadkari ji the other day, we actually...
Well, another highlight of the day, the African Union is now a permanent member of the G20. The 55-member African bloc became the first new member of the G20 since its creation in 1999 to cope with a series of financial crises. In the last few years, India has been positioning itself as a leading voice of the global south and has been flagging concerns, challenges and aspirations of the developing nations, especially the African continent. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been leading from the front on the issue of the AU's membership of the G20. In June, the Prime Minister wrote to the G20 leaders pitching for this membership, a full membership for the grouping at the New Delhi Summit. So weeks later, the proposal was formally included in the draft communique for the summit during the third G20 Sherpas meeting that took place in Karnataka's Hampi in July earlier this year. So what does this mean for the African Union? Now, Africa's voice is all set to get a bigger platform to speak on global issues. This is something that has been a pain point for the entire global south, which includes, of course, prominently the African continent. The continent can now proactively shape the global policy. This move will also balance out some of China's expanding influence in this region. That is a growing concern for the world because of what we've seen China is capable of. There's the debt traps, there's the expansionism and more. It can also help African Union secure rare minerals in the continent. So this is a big win, and not to overestimate this, but certainly a legacy that India is going to leave as far as the G20 is concerned because of the role that it has played in getting in the African Union. And speaking of the African Union, I want to go across to a very special guest. Mary Milburn, American singer, is joining us. She is, of course, used to singing for many presidents and dignitaries around the world and sang the Bharat national anthem for the Prime Minister when he was on the US trip. Mary, very nice talking to you again.
It's wonderful to see you, Shivani. Thanks so much for having me on. And what a historic day today is for India and certainly for the G20.
You tweeted earlier today that it brought tears to your eyes to see the African Union being included as the G20 member. Why is that? Why is this so emotional? Of course, you have African heritage, but you are an American. Could you explain to me a little bit more of why this is so important?
Well, absolutely. It's such a, I tell you, seeing the photos, certainly my morning, your evening, seeing the photos of the Prime Minister and certainly the African leaders, they're hugging after the announcement was made, and seeing the energy certainly in the room. It was certainly, I'm sure it was emotional for many people, particularly see such an important continent, a continent that all G20 countries are certainly benefiting from, their economies thriving from trade and economic engagement. So to see that moment, certainly at the helm of the G20 being in India, and with the Prime Minister's courageous and compassionate leadership, it was just an emotional moment to see these two motherlands embrace both diplomatically and in friendship form. And so it's a historic day for the G20. It's a historic day for India, and really hats off to the Prime Minister for his great leadership.
What about the role that India has played? Of course, you've always been a big fan of the Prime Minister. I'll get to that in just a bit, or you could add why that is. What is it that make you, that makes you appreciate what he's doing? But especially in the context of, pushing the African Union's place in the G20, he certainly has played a big role.
Absolutely. Well, you know, Shivani, as your audience in India knows, I am a big fan of the Prime Minister. I think he is the best leader for India. He's the best leader for the U.S.-India relationship, and he certainly is the best leader for India as it relates to the world. That's on full display here at the G20 this week. And I tell you, my admiration for the Prime Minister certainly stems from his humility, his humble beginnings. He's a true man of the people, and that's certainly a phrase that's not foreign to India and certainly all across the world. But he is a man of the people. More importantly, the Prime Minister made a bold move to submit a proposal for the African Union becoming a permanent member, and perhaps in some ways in solo form. But I'm glad to see that all countries have joined with the Prime Minister, including the United States. And supporting now the African Union being a permanent member. And it's beautiful to see that consensus happening. This step towards having the African Union as a permanent member in the G20, it's a step toward a more representative and equitable global governance system. That's so important going forward with all of the world challenges that we are facing. And so the Prime Minister has championed causes for raising up, lifting up the marginalized, raising up, lifting up certainly women and women empowerment. He has championed causes that are about lifting up those that are sometimes left from the table. And by making this move, the Prime Minister has now brought the African Union to the table, which is important for solving the world's challenging problems.
So, no, a lot has been talked about the global south, and the world cannot progress anymore unless the global south also has a seat on the table and gets its due share to its people in the development and its fruits. Mary, stay with me. I also want to go across to Manjeet Kripalani, who's founder and director of Gateway House, another prominent think tank in the country, and Farwa Amer, director of South Asia Initiatives at Asia Society Policy Institute, is joining us from New York as well. Manjeet, just the role that India has played in not just getting in the African Union, into the G20, the conduct and the way that it has managed to host the world, the fact that the Delhi Declaration has now been announced, all of this is really improving the stature of the country. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And Shivani, it is not just that India is doing this because it's been, it has to do this. Nobody was in training to do this. These are things that come naturally to India, right? We treat our guests well. We're affectionate with our families. We know how to greet people, and we understand the problems of people like us very well. And India is the crucible, right? Inside every village of the world is an Indian village, and vice versa. And so this comes naturally to us. So what we've done is we have allowed our natural impulses and our desires to be translated into a global moment. And you saw from the very warm embrace that the Prime Minister and the head of the African Union, by the way, who's not from Nigeria or one of the big countries, he's from Comoros, right, which is a tiny country out there in the middle of the ocean. It was a very emotional moment. And the good thing is, it's okay to be emotional.
Yes.
It's okay with the emotional continent, and it's really okay. And if that is the way of the world, it's a really good thing.
Yes. Farwa, you want to add on to that, the role that India is playing in shining a light, especially on the global south, of course, in this case, particularly on the African continent, and how, the Western world or the North Bloc needs to now realize that this needs to be done. Do you think India has been very successful in that message? And the Prime Minister has been talking about the global south for quite some time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've reiterated this several times that within the G20 presidency, India has kind of proven not only its global prowess, but also its regional prowess. It started off its presidency on the note of supporting the development causes of the global south. And with the New Delhi Leaders Declaration, we've seen that. We've seen that with the inclusion of the African Union, which of course is a historic moment, that India's presidency for the G20 has actually met the ambition it started off with. And it's being seen as, on a global scale, as a very welcomed approach. It's, of course, a celebratory moment for the country, but also for the entire developing world. Even just going by the declaration right there, the kind of causes it uplifts, it empowers, whether it's you're looking at climate change, climate financing, sustainable developments, they hit home for a lot of developing world, a lot of countries in the global south. So, and especially because it kind of intertwines it not only with finance, but also with multilateralism and support politically and security-wise for these countries. So in that manner, I think it's a huge success for India, for the G20 members, and for the platform in itself, that it establishes once again that it is an economic forum. It's a forum for connectivity and cooperation, and that's what the summit is proving itself to be.
Mary, I want to come back to you. I just want to understand from you what it means as an African American for you. Is it something that the community still thinks about, what's happening in Africa, no matter where you are? You are, of course, an American and a proud one at that. But is this something that the community at large thinks about? Those outside of Africa also think about of what's happening in the continent. It's been liberated in that sense, along with, India, for example. Many of those countries were liberated and won their freedom along with India or on the close heels of India. But the growth and the development or the conflict that sometimes we see in Africa has been heartbreaking. Is this something that that is important to the community, for the continent to get a greater voice?
Yes, it's important to the community, and also it's important to the United States at large. And that's why certainly it was wonderful to see the United States stand by the Prime Minister here at the G20 to support this move to have the African Union a part of the G20. And yes, personally, as an African American, my ancestry being from Africa, there is a place in my heart, as it would be in any heart, yes, to see the motherland grow, to see the motherland thrive, to see the motherland at the table as the world's challenging problems are discussed and be an active player in solving those problems. And so I think now going forward with this historic move, it's important that the G20 countries come together and now at a greater scale share scientific, agricultural, technological expertise with African countries so that a greater equal playing field can be laid. We all care about the Africa growth story. And Africa is such a beautiful land, a continent with such untapped potential. And so to see this move, Shivani, it personally touched me to see the motherland, my ancestry, now have a seat at the table in a fair and equitable way in the G20. And again, I applaud the Prime Minister for his leadership in that.
Mary, I'm almost out of time, but before I let you go, I do want you to maybe tell us what you're thinking musically today. What is the song that comes to your mind, and if you can hum a little bit of it after a very successful day of the Delhi G20 Summit?
Well, I tell you, I knew you were going to ask me, Shivani, of course. The song that comes to mind is one we all know that was penned by Michael Jackson, and it says, "Heal the world, make it a better place for you and for me and the entire human race. There are people dying. If you care enough for the living, make a better place for you and for me. Make a better place. We got to heal the world together, Shivani."
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really wanted to hum, but I controlled myself because I didn't want to spoil the beautiful melody that you were singing.
Next time, Shivani, beat on me.
Next time, when you are here in person, I'll definitely try to pitch in. But Mary, thanks a lot for speaking to us, and of course for that melodious voice. I think I'm going to go home and listen to some more Michael Jackson tonight. But I want to take some final comments. Thank you. I want to take some final comments from Manjeet Kripalani and Parva as well. Manjeet, just the pride at being able to host this grand event. I think this is the largest scale we have seen of any event being pulled off in India. The fact that it has been done so well, it is working like clockwork. Some of the consciousness that we have at not being as good as the rest of the world. I think this is also the conduct of the G20 is also going to give a lot of confidence to Indians that actually if we put our minds and hearts together, we can pull off the best in the world.
Yes, you're right. I remember very well when China was hosting the Olympics. I had a very acute case of China envy because they did such a lovely job. And what that did was it just gave all of China a real boost. You could see the Chinese were walking with a newfound confidence, and they hosted a global event really spectacularly. I have to admit that I was a little worried last year because I worried that India wasn't getting involved in the G20 troika early enough, and I worried terribly that our spaces were not ready. But guess what happened? It wasn't just the government that was doing the building. In Mumbai, for instance, the Geo Center opened, and that is able to accommodate lots of people. So the early meeting last year in December took place in Mumbai, and this was part of the rollout for this to take place everywhere else. You may remember also China was G20 chair in 2016. They built new buildings, literally completed 3 days before the actual event was held there.
Right.
So, we are developing countries, and this is what we do. This is a chance for us to build our infrastructure. I hope that now that we know that we can do things equally, we know we have good
changes the
leadership,
mindset,
and we know we can roll it out. Yes, it changes the mindset.
Exactly.
And also, Shivani, there's we had just come up the moon landing.
Yes.
This is a tremendous boost to our internal confidence. So
okay,
I think
absolutely.
That
I would compare it a little bit to, the metro in the national capital. I firmly believe, and I am from the national capital, the metro, the way it was constructed and the way it has run itself has been one of the first very successful institutions that were run the way that they were run, and it instilled so much pride, and it gave other institutions of the same kind, or bodies, governmental or otherwise, faith and belief and maybe a kick in the back that you can do it, you can function as the best anywhere in the world. I'm running out of time, Farwa. I have 30 seconds left. Quick comment on how the world is viewing India because of this G20 summit.
The world is viewing India as a key partner. That's what I would like to say. Whether you look at Europe, whether you look at the West, whether you look at the Middle East or the global South, India has emerged as a key partner for all on a global platform.
All right. Farwa and Manjeet, thanks a lot for joining us. On that note, I have to slip into a very short break, but stay with us. The dinner is about to begin in the national capital and we'll continue to get you live coverage.
The two work together to mutually resolve a very divided geopolitical climate.
Of course, Prime Minister Kishida and Prime Minister Modi have been working very closely together. Prime Minister Modi attended the G7 Hiroshima Summit, and before G7 Hiroshima Summit, Prime Minister Kishida came to Delhi in March this year. So we are collaborating very closely between G7 presidency and G20 presidency. And Prime Minister Kishida is looking forward to contributing to the success of G20 summit in India.
There's in fact input coming in that India has managed to get the Delhi Declaration through. How closely has Japan worked on this Delhi Declaration with India to ensure that all parties are on the same page, even the ones who were expected to sort of pose a hurdle?
We commend the efforts of Indian government led by Prime Minister Modi to generate a positive outcome of G20 summit. And Japan has also been very proactive in supporting G20 presidency of India. So hopefully this would solidify our further cooperation toward the future.
Reporting out here at CNN News 18 that there is absolute watertight security that can be seen on the ground, making sure that in this big ticket event there is no lapses, there is no loophole that is left, and that is the reason why not only the Delhi police but also members of the ITBP and central police forces have also been deployed to make sure that there is absolutely no issue or there is.
Between 9 a.m. and 9:45 a.m. movement from various hotels taking the heads of states and delegates to the Bharat Mandapam is beginning, and ahead of that security bandobast is being tightened further. You can see these are roads from near Hotel Oberoi, near Hotel Lodhi, and also the Claridges which hosts the French heads of state and the French delegation. So in that generic area, multiple layers of barricades have been put up. Delhi police is manning these barricades. Even people with valid I cards are not being allowed to move further. Till yesterday, even though this flyover takes you, this is still South Delhi, this is not New Delhi area, but until yesterday, people were being allowed to move, but today, there are multiple layers of barricading here. Delhi police is here, paramilitary forces deployed as well. More barricades have been brought in, and they are ensuring that people don't really cross over this area. This will ultimately lead you to Bharat Mandapam. What is the drill that is being followed as far as movement of heads of states are concerned? Advanced security liaison has been conducted. There are security and liaison officers sitting with the heads of the security delegations of the various countries and really figuring out movements, etc. There are specific flags, specific routes that are marked. There are contingency plans as well. When a head of state moves from the hotel to the Bharat Mandapam towards the Pragati Maidan area, if there is an exigency, there are routes that have been marked as to where the driver, specially trained driver, can take the car carrying the heads of state. And here you see, as police is stopping more and more vehicles, even checking the I card, even government I cards are being checked, and only then are they being allowed to move, but not being allowed to move further, as you see.
Approximately 200 meters away from the Bharat Mandapam, that is going to see all the head of states coming out here and attending this G20 summit. And as you can see in the visuals over here, there is absolutely watertight security that can be seen on the ground. Absolutely no one is being allowed to enter the central Delhi area at this point in time unless they have the requisite passes and the requisite permissions. Senior officials of the Delhi police are on the ground making sure that the entire security arrangement is in place. Vehicles who are trying to move inside the central Delhi or the NDMC area from towards ITO, they are being checked, they are being frisked at different checkpoints that have been made out here, making sure that no unauthorized person is allowed to go inside the place where the G20 event is happening, or even anywhere close to the NDMC area, because remember, the movement of delegates have started, the movement of the head of states have started, and they are slowly reaching towards the Bharat Mandapam, from where the massive G20 event will start, which will actually pitch the idea of a new Bharat, a Bharat that is ready to take on the world, and that is what we are going to see over the next 2 days. You can see in the visuals over here that each and every person, either from the medical staff or from essential services, their passes are being checked, their ID cards are being checked, their passes for the vehicles are being checked, and post that they are being allowed to go inside, they are being allowed to go anywhere inside the NDMC area. And this is the kind of security that we have been reporting out here at CNN News 18, that there is absolute watertight security that can be seen on the ground, making sure that in this big ticket event there is no lapses, there is no loophole that is left. And that is the reason why not only the Delhi police but also members of the ITBP and central police forces have also been deployed to make sure that there is absolutely no issue, or there is.
Between 9 a.m. and 9:45 a.m., movement from various hotels taking the heads of states and delegates to the Bharat Mandapam is beginning, and ahead of that, security bandobast is being tightened further. You can see these are roads from near Hotel Oberoi, near Hotel Lodhi, and also the carriages which hosts the French heads of state and the French delegation. So in that generic area, multiple layers of barricades have been put up. Delhi police is manning these barricades. Even people with valid I cards are not being allowed to move further. Till yesterday, even though this flyover takes you, this is still South Delhi, this is not New Delhi area, but until yesterday, people were being allowed to move, but today, there are multiple layers of barricading here. Delhi police is here, paramilitary forces deployed as well. More barricades have been brought in, and they are ensuring that people don't really cross over this area. This will ultimately lead you to Bharat Mandapam. What is the drill that is being followed as far as movement of heads of states are concerned? Advanced security liaison has been conducted. There are security and liaison officers sitting with the heads of the security delegations of the various countries and really figuring out movements, etc. There are specific flags, specific routes that are marked. There are contingency plans as well. When a head of state moves from the hotel to the Bharat Mandapam towards the Pragati Maidan area, if there is an exigency, there are routes that have been marked as to where the driver, specially trained driver, can take the car carrying the heads of state. And here you see, as police is stopping more and more vehicles, even checking the I card, even government I cards are being checked, and only then are they being allowed to move, but not being allowed to move further, as you see.
Approximately 200 meters away from the Bharat Mandapam, that is going to see all the head of states coming out here and attending this G20 Summit. And as you can see in the visuals over here, there is absolutely watertight security that can be seen on the ground. Absolutely no one is being allowed to enter the central Delhi area at this point in time unless they have the requisite passes and the requisite permissions. Senior officials of the Delhi police are on the ground making sure that the entire security arrangement is in place. Vehicles who are trying to move inside the central Delhi or the NDMC area from towards ITO, they are being checked, they are being frisked at different checkpoints that have been made out here, making sure that no unauthorized person is allowed to go inside the place where the G20 event is happening, or even anywhere close to the NDMC area, because remember, the movement of delegates have started, the movement of the head of states have started, and they are slowly reaching towards the Bharat Mandapam, from where the massive G20 event will start, which will actually pitch the idea of a new Bharat, a Bharat that is ready to take on the world, and that is what we are going to see over the next 2 days. You can see in the visuals over here that each and every person, either from the medical staff or from essential services, their passes are being checked, their ID cards are being checked, their passes for the vehicles are being checked, and post that they are being allowed to go inside, they are being allowed to go anywhere inside the NDMC area. And this is the kind of security that we have been reporting out here at CNN News 18, that there is absolute watertight security that can be seen on the ground, making sure that in this big ticket event there is no lapses.
Namaste, Jai Hind, and welcome to this very, very special edition of The Right Stand, coming to you from the second floor here at the International Media Centre, the same spot where I started at about 7:15 a.m. this morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm back here, but the view of the Bharat Mandapam is just phenomenal in the sun, in the dark. It's beautifully lit. Exhibition hall number 14, where largely most of the summit level conversations happened. That was right at the basement there, that's lit. You can see that's where Prime Minister Narendra Modi welcomed all the member nations who are participating here. Nearly 39 countries have sent their top leaders and their heads, visiting heads of state, all of them there. And that's the beautiful hall number 14. And next to that, beautifully lit in saffron, white and green, the tricolour is the Bharat Mandapam. Those colours will keep changing. Next to that, you see the monument there, once again bathed in the tricolour, saffron, white and green. This beautiful setup is right now hosting the Ratri Bhoj, or the dinner that's being hosted by the Rashtrapati, Srimati Draupadi Murmu. We've got details of the menu there, and it's clearly the Sharad Ritu menu that's been followed there. There is a cultural extravaganza. We should get pictures. It will go late into the evening till about 10:30. We're given to understand, before as all the leaders will leave for the day and come back for day 2 of the summit, which President Joe Biden once again has tweeted saying that after a productive day 1, I'm looking forward to a productive day 2 at the summit. What are the deliverables? What are the achievables in day 2? One can only understand because most of the big boxes have been ticked. If we were to describe how the day actually went,